Um, so how did you get from conscious universe to entangled minds? What was the evolution?
Um, I wrote about 80% of the conscious universe when I was at Princeton. And I wrote it because at the time I was not in, but affiliated with the Pear Lab there, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. And one of the complaints I heard probably most often from the faculty was that what they're doing in the lab, maybe it's real, maybe it isn't, we don't know, because none of it has ever been replicated, which is, of course, the currency in science. And I knew that wasn't the case, because these things have been replicated up the wazoo. So I decided to write a book which described what meta-analysis was and how it had been applied to these kinds of phenomena and so on. So I wrote that, and I could not sell that to anybody. I wrote it as an academic book, and nobody was interested in it, or they didn't understand it, or who knows what. So I set it aside. Some years later, I was at the University of Nevada, and I was featured in the New York Times Magazine
I read
article.
that one in '96.
Yeah. And the next day, I had 4 offers for people who said, would you be interested in writing a book? And I said, well, do I have something for you? So I went with HarperCollins and basically finished the remaining 20% of the book. So that's where that came from. So I had written that 10 years before I actually had a chance to even publish it. So the next question after that book that most people said is, well, okay, I'm convinced that empirically something's going on, but how do you explain any of this? So I decided to take the physics route, mainly because people would then say, well, this seems to violate what we know about physics. And I knew that wasn't true either. So that led to Entangled Minds. And the next one was, people after reading Entangled Minds would say, well, this is all well and good, so maybe it doesn't violate physics and it's repeatable, but how do we understand it? And as I was saying before, that if you try to take a materialistic perspective on this, it gets really difficult to try to understand it. So I decided to look for clues elsewhere. And so the first clue was the Eastern esoteric traditions, because I know that in classical yoga, there's this whole tradition of the siddhis. And Westerners don't know so much about the cities. So that's what supernormal came from.
I'm just going to add that cities is spelled S-I-D-D-I, not C-I-T-I-E-S.
Yeah, S-I-D-D-H-I.
H-I.
Yeah. So, and then after writing that, I decided to tackle the Western esoteric traditions, which we know better because to become an expert in Eastern esotericism is certainly possible, and there are people who do that. I didn't have the patience to go through it, because to really understand it, I have to learn Sanskrit and a few other things I don't have time to do. Whereas it's easier in the Western view, and it's probably a little more compatible to the Western mind as well. So that's why I did that for Supernormal, and basically
did you look at mystics and Sufis? Who did you look at for the...
For which?
For the Western understanding.
Oh, well, the Sufis would be Eastern.
Okay.
No, for Western, it's Plato and Neoplatonism and Gnosticism and Hermeticism, and then the Kabbalah, Rosicrucians, Knights Templar. You could bring it all the way up to the present day. All of that is part of the same Western thread.
Maybe Theosophy.
Theosophy, yes. Christian Science, Mesmerism, all of it. Aleister Crowley. So all of that's part of the same tradition. At the earliest stages, there's a strong overlap between Eastern esotericism. It basically is the same up until maybe 1,000 years after Plato. But I didn't want to confuse the issue because I'm writing for a popular audience. I did pass it through some of my colleagues who are religious scholars to make sure I didn't make a mistake. And they said, yeah, that's right. That's as best as we know the actual history. So what I'm doing in that book is casting. They make the analogy that technology is to science as magic is to the esoteric traditions. Magic is a technology of the worldview that we call the esoteric traditions. It's an application, just like a technology is an application of the scientific worldview.
Mm. And this was in Supernormal that you discussed these traditions?
No, that's in Real Magic.
What did you do in Supernormal?
Supernormal focused on classical yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Mainly because, I talk a lot about parapsychology as well, but I use the Yoga Sutras as a way of showing that in this classic book of yoga, 1/3 of the book, or 1/4 of the book, is devoted not only to a description of these abilities, but recipes on how to do them. So at least 2,000 years ago, people had no problem that these things existed, and if you meditate long enough and do the right kind of yoga, you will eventually bump into them, which is why Patanjali, I guess, felt it was necessary to talk about them.
I think a lot of people have read Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda, and there's a lot of siddhis in there that are in more recent times.
Yeah, no, the idea of the siddhis is not that they're only ancient, because the most elementary siddhi that's described is essentially precognition, as perception of the past, the present, and the future. And this is the very first thing that he talks about because it's so common. We did a survey at work at IONS to ask something like 1,000 or 1,500 meditators what kinds of experiences had they encountered as a result of their meditative practice. And you get the whole range of the siddhis. Oh. So something like 75% of meditators, whether they're beginning or advanced, say, yeah, they either at once or frequently will have encountered these kinds of phenomena. So it took us 3 years to publish that paper because every time we talk, this is all about advanced meditation research. It's like getting beyond the idea that it will relax your mind and body. Of course, we're saturated with those papers all the time. This is saying, well, what else happens? Well, what else happens is that you start perceiving the universe. There are all kinds of strange things that happen. It took us a long time to find a journal that was willing to publish that.
So are those siddhis that they experienced precognition, levitating? What kind of siddhis did they experience in contemporary times?
Well, all of them. So there's roughly 25 siddhis that are mentioned in the Yoga Sutras. If you categorize them, they fall into the classic forms of clairvoyance and precognition and psychokinesis and so on. People describe having all of those experiences. They also describe them roughly in correlation with the way that they're described in the Yoga Sutras. And if you imagine that the sutras are described from elementary and common to very rare, that's more or less what you see. I haven't done a one-to-one comparison, but like the number of people who say that they've actually become invisible or levitated, which is part of the siddhis, extremely rare. Even Patanjali and others up to the present day will say, yeah, it's possible, but it's very, very rare that anybody will get those abilities. Whereas something as simple as seeing through space and time, that's like vanilla stuff. Everybody's going to end up with that. They might call it a synchronicity, and we call it a precognitive dream, something like that, but that's so common as to be no big deal. And you see that then reflected in people's experiences.
The transcendental meditation people for a while were really keen on levitating. I've seen videos where they're like bouncing up and down.
Yeah, I've asked John Hagelin, who's now the head of that organization, has anyone actually hovered for like a millisecond? The answer is no. No one has been able to actually levitate. They can jump in interesting ways, but that's as far as they've gotten.
But I think the real yogis in India have levitated.
I think it's possible. We don't have contemporary examples of people who can do it under controlled conditions. I hear a lot of stories.
Yeah.
But when I am directed to a YouTube to watch somebody do something, and I think the YouTube might be real, they're hopping. They're not floating. So in Real Magic, I take a chapter to talk about historical cases that are very persuasive. But this must be rare to the point of like 1 in a billion people can do this.
What's your next book? What's your next one where your wheels are spinning?
Well, I was thinking of doing a book on practical magic, because that's the next thing people usually think about is, well, okay, I can buy that maybe magic is real. How do I do it? What do I do? If I take that route, it will deflect me pretty strongly away from the things that I actually know about. I'm sure I can write something about it, but I would just be echoing what everyone else has already said. So that doesn't sound very satisfying to me. So I'm waiting for an inspiration to tell me what would the next book, what should it be. So I know I have 2 more books, 2 more nonfiction books, and then I'm going to write fiction. But I don't know yet what it's going to be.
You just know that precognitively.
Yes.
Okay. My Essential Energy Tools books, How to Develop Your Clairvoyant and Healing Abilities, is really a how-to book, if that's any help. So let's talk about if you have hope for the future. I mean, it's so easy to be pessimistic when we think of what we're doing to the environment and we have these Trump clones being elected around the world. Is there hope?
Well, I'm a chronic optimist. So, of course, there's hope. I mean, if you look in historical terms, we've been in much, much darker places, even in the history of the United States, in the history within the world. We've been on the edge of apocalypse many, many times. So, yeah, I think there's plenty of room for hope.
But some scientists say we have maybe 12 years to turn around global warming and then we're devastated. So how do you have hope in the face of what we're doing to the planet?
Well, humans are very resilient, and the planet is much more resilient than we usually think. It has all kinds of feedback systems in it that we hope will prevent it from doing something bad. If the environment changes quickly, which it seems to be doing now, evolution will respond to that, as it has done many, many times before. In the process, from each individual person, in terms of how we're currently living, it may not be fun at all. We might drop half or 90% of the population. But I'm reasonably sure that something will persist. The thrust of evolution is not a linear path always up. It's one of these spiral things, but ultimately it does seem to be moving in a direction. So I think that will persist. Whether it persists as humans on Earth is another issue.
What are the other possibilities?
I'm sure there's intelligent life saturated everywhere in the universe in many, many different forms. So from a universal perspective, the direction of the arrow is up. If we think of it in terms of order or something. But I still think that the humans are resilient, can change very quickly, both in terms of behavior and physical structure, according to what the environment demands. You'd see it as generational changes, it's too late for us. And we tend not to think in terms of the very long term. So in the short term, there will be continual problems, as there always are. In the longer term, I think it'll be okay. On the other hand, as I said, I'm a chronic optimist. I understand pessimism very well, and I just decided I don't want to go there.
So what do you do for fun outside of research in the lab?
That is the most fun that anybody could have. So I discovered a video game that I've become fond of, a golf game on a smartphone. So I do that. That's my fun. It's like having a momentary chocolate bar.
Yeah.
But I have so many things that I'm doing that I almost don't even have time to have fun. And I think of the scene from the movie Predator. Remember the movie Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger?
I don't see scary movies.
Yeah, it's pretty violent. So They're a team of special operators or something that are brought in to hunt down an alien. They don't know yet that it's an alien, but it's like it's a predator alien that's after these guys, and the Schwarzenegger concept. So one of the people is shot during it's actually Jesse Ventura. It's one of the actors. He gets shot during one of the things, and he's bleeding, and one of his buddies says, "Oh, you're bleeding," and Jesse says, "I don't have time to bleed." So that phrase kind of comes to mind every so often. I don't have time to have fun. I'm having too much fun.
That's great. So what else next in the lab? It sounds like you're mostly working with intentional changes in plasma or cells or whatever. What else are you?
Well, these are 4 ongoing experiments. They're all involving physical targets in one form or another. So I need to get those off of my plate, basically. After that, I'm not so sure. I have lots and lots of things I could do. But those are active now. They'll probably remain active for another 6 months or so. I just got a grant to continue it, so maybe I'll go to the end of next year. I don't know yet.
So, like with the plasma, what is the intention? What kind of impact do you want to have on it in the lab?
It's to mentally affect the direction that the plasma is flowing, because it's inside a sphere. It can go in any direction. It's to either pull it towards you or to push it up or push it to the right, purely mentally. So plasma is a nice target because it's the so-called 4th state of matter. It's not liquid, solid, or gas. It's something quite different. It is exquisitely sensitive to electromagnetic and magnetic forces. So even the tiniest bit of an electromagnetic push will change the direction of the plasma because it's very reactive to it. So when you look at the plasma, it looks like a living system. It's so dynamic. It's like a sinewy, undulating thing constantly, like it's alive. And so you get the sense that it is reactive at least. The question is it reactive to the mind? And so we've done 3 experiments so far. 2 of them show pretty strong evidence that it is behaving according to what people want it to behave like. So it's an interesting physical target. This fits within an umbrella that we're calling IONS X. So IONS X is applications. It's an effort to, rather than simply see if we're seeing an effect in a random generator or something, we want to make it apply. So in order to apply it to something, we need to have larger effects, larger and more robust effects. So I'm looking at a wide variety of different kinds of physical targets with the hope that some of them will be more responsive than something like a random generator, which, as I mentioned before, is designed to not respond. So plasma requires different kinds of statistics. It's not simple statistics anymore because the thing is constantly moving. It's like a living system. But you can deal with that, and the results show, yeah, it could eventually, maybe with training, but it seems to be more responsive to intention than some of the other targets that I worked with.
Do you find that there are some people, I think it's called, that are friendly, whereas someone like Susan Blackmore in England, all her psi experiments don't turn out. So there's something about, well, obviously that's going to influence. We know the observer influences the outcome.
Yeah, if somebody does not want to see an effect, that becomes their intention.
Yeah.
And since intention seems to influence these things, if they don't want to see it, they won't. It's really that simple. So what it makes it more complex is that maybe they say they want to see something, but subconsciously they don't really, because they're afraid of it or something. And well, the unconscious is more powerful than the conscious and can override it. So you need people who are in alignment with their actual wants and beliefs, and those tend to do better. It's difficult, though, to ask somebody. You ask somebody, are you unconsciously afraid of these phenomena? Well, by definition, they don't know. It's in their a portion of their awareness that they can't get. I would say many people are afraid. Others are not. And it depends on training and belief and all kinds of things.
Or then ego can get involved with it. I'm committed to disproving psi research, so it better disprove it. So it's an ego thing, not rather than a fear thing.
Right, and that's a double-edged sword because it could be, as you just said, or it could be the other way, where a person has delusions of grandeur and they're thinking they're the next Messiah, and so they have a lot of anxiety associated with their demonstration of their ability, and so the anxiety gets in the way too. So you need to be in that strange state of effortless striving, where you're in alignment with what you want to do, with what the task is, that you're not going to block yourself. All of those things come into play. Fortunately, most of the people at IONS are kind of already in that space, so we use the staff as many of our subjects. And they enjoy it because they don't often get to go into the lab and see what's happening, and experiments are kind of fun. So we get pretty good data just by grabbing people, basically, who are at work.
It would be interesting to see if you got better results from people who meditated just before doing the experiment, so that they were in that kind of neutral state.
Ideally, I would want to spend about an hour with each person beforehand to get them into the right frame of mind. Generally, we have them for 20 minutes because we're pulling them away from some other task that they're doing.
Right.
And so 20 minutes, you can get anybody to do anything. To take an hour and a half or so to prepare somebody. We do that for some experiments, like we've done a series of studies with mediums and with channelers, trance channelers. So for a trance channeler to get into that state takes a while. We're putting on a 64 channel EEG, which takes like an hour. So we compensate them for their time, and they come in especially for that, and it may take all day. Well, we don't have the luxury of time to do that, so we work with what we have.
Do you ever work with Asclepion? It was a branch of the Berkeley Psychic Institute that trains trance mediums.
We may have worked with some of the mediums that went through that program, but I don't know. I didn't.
Because they're in Marin County.
I thought they're in Berkeley.
The Berkeley Psychic Institute is, I'm out of touch, but then Asclepion was in Marin County.
Oh.
Because they split. Because of egos. John Fulton, Louis Bostwick.
Yeah. I don't know it at that level of depth. I know that when we put out a call for mediums, we're able to get as many mediums as we can possibly handle.
Wow.
We've worked with, I forget now, over 20, most of whom in the Bay Area. Some we had to fly in. They're sort of celebrity medium types. And so of all of them that I've worked with, I would say Suzanne Geisman is the one that's been most impressive from my experience.
I've never heard of her. Okay, last question. Who else should be in the book that you think of as doing cutting edge?
Well, tell me again who already is in the book so I can compare.
Let me just read you my little list. I'm almost there. Come on. Peter Russell, Russell Targ, Gary Schwartz, Larry Dossie. Come on, open up. Do you know a guy named Imat Baruch who's in Ontario?
Yes.
I did. He was really fun.
Uh-huh. Do you have Charlie Tart on that list?
I queried him, but I haven't heard from him.
Okay. So how about Jessica Utz?
No.
Yeah, I should add Jessica Utz.
Jessica. How do you spell Utz?
UTTS.
Okay.
She's recently retired from UC Irvine, but I'm sure that her email is still good. It's jmutz@uci.edu.
Okay. Anybody else that comes to mind?
Well, Marilyn Schlitz is probably...
She said she would get to me.
Okay.
I do need more women.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So Christine Simmons-Moore at University of West Georgia, she might be interesting.
Christine Page said she's too busy.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Another might be Emily Cook. Emily Cook has worked for many years at the University of Virginia group, the Division of Personality Studies.
Yeah.
She's done mediumship studies, has been involved in that program for many years. Oh, Caroline Watt.
Don't know her.
Yeah, so Caroline Watt is the Kessler.
W-A-T-T?
W-A-T-T, yeah. She's the Kessler Professor of Parapsychology at the University of Edinburgh.
Ah. Oh, that would be great.
And the other is Deborah Delanoy, who's now retired, but she started the program at the University of Northampton in the UK. Deborah Delanoy.
And how do you spell Delanoy?
Delanoy, D-E-L-A-N-O-Y.
Okay. Great. Those are great leads.
Let's see. You might want to talk to Garrett Modell. It's M-O-D-D-E-L. He's at the University of Colorado Boulder. So he's an electrical engineering professor, specializes in quantum electronics devices, but has a long-term interest in parapsychology and has actually got permission to teach a course for advanced students at the University of Colorado. So he has I think he probably does it about once a year, and they do experiments in that course. So he's an interesting guy.
Oh, yeah.
I could probably think of others, but
if you do, shoot me an email.
Okay.
Please. Okay, so I will get this on YouTube to get transcribed, and if it's okay with you, I'll leave it public on YouTube because it's so interesting on my channel.
Maybe. I'd like to see it first because since I'm speaking off the top of my head, I want to be careful. I'm not going to say something I wish I didn't say.
We could always edit, but I'll keep it private until you have a chance to look at it.
Okay.
Thank you so much. This was so illuminating.
Well, I hope your son comes back.
Oh, gosh.
Our sun, I don't see any sun now, and we have that strange orange glow, but it looks like you were like we were last year after Santa Rosa burned down.
How long did it take before it cleared?
About a month. So it's